What is going on, guys? We are back, and today I'm going to be making a mod spotlight on the mod Immersive Engineering. So clearly you're here watching this video because you want to start playing with the mod, you're looking for some info on it, and I have to say that this is a great mod. You have made a great choice to play with this mod. Now, I've played through the game with this mod. I have done almost everything imaginable with this in my Surviving with Immersive Engineering series, and I learned pretty much all you can learn about it, which is why it was highly requested that I make this video. So hopefully I'll be able to give you guys all the information you're going to need to play through with this mod and have a great time with it. One thing I want to say is that do not be scared away by the really long video time. I know that is really a deterrent when it comes to mod spotlights, but I'm going to throw annotations on the screen right now to go to a bunch of different sections in this video that are going to cover power generation, light machinery, heavy machinery, so you can go through, find exactly what you need, and you don't need to sit through like an hour-long video searching for that one little grain of information that you need. Also, if you want any more in-depth information, feel free to look at my Surviving With series, where it's roughly 30 episodes, and each episode covers a different piece, and I play through the game without using creative, so you'll be able to see, how you get the stuff, how long it takes to get it, what you should do with it, all that different stuff. So without further ado, we can jump right into it. Okay guys, so first things first, we're going to be talking about everything related to power transportation, power conversion, power storage, all that good stuff. But before we jump into that, we're going to come over to this chest right here and get out a bunch of useful tools that are offered by Immersive Engineering. So, the most useful tool you will have, more useful than this video, more useful than every single block, every entry in a wiki page, is going to be the Engineer's Manual. This is going to be your best friend through your entire playthrough of Immersive Engineering, because it's essentially having a wiki written by the developer of the mod at your service whenever you need it in the game. So you're going to want that, and then along with that you're going to want the engineer's hammer, the engineer's wire cutters, and the engineer's voltmeter. So these two right here, the wire cutters and the voltmeter, are extremely useful when it comes to power, and along with that the engineer's hammer is a little bit nicer when you want to make things look fancy when you're using these wooden posts, but we'll jump into that in a little bit. First things first, I want to cover this book right here. So when you open this, you are going to see that there's a nice little table of contents right here. You've got update news, and then you've got pretty much all the different things that I'm going to cover in this video. And you can click through here, you can see all these different entries, and what they'll do is they'll have recipes, they'll have how you construct things, they'll have details on everything that you could possibly need to know. So if you don't want to watch the video, you can go look in this book right here, and it should have everything you need to know. Now we can actually jump into the power portion of this. So to start things out, you're going to be using low voltage wiring. Now you can use low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage, which are going to transport three different amounts of RF per tick. Low voltage is 256 RF per tick, medium voltage is 1024 RF per tick, and high voltage is going to be 496 RF per tick. So of course, like I said, you're going to start out with low voltage, which is what you see right here. Now, Immersive Engineering is very interesting in the sense that you don't just put one wire from one thing to another, you actually use these wire connectors. Now, for low voltage and medium voltage, and I know this is going to be a little bit complicated, but just bear with me. For low voltage and medium voltage, these wire connectors act as inputs, outputs, and throughputs, in the sense that you could have this one right here as an output and the one over here as an input. And along with that, you could also use them to traverse long distances, because these only go 16 blocks. You can only run these a max of 16 blocks, which is what you see right here. If you had to go any further, you would need to take another wire and run it from this to another one. If you tried to run it any further with just one wire, you would get a message in chat that says you can't go this far, and you'd have to make it a little bit shorter to actually be able to connect it. That's the same for medium voltage. They can only go 16 blocks. And again, this wire connector works as an input, an output, and a throughput. Now, the reason that I'm stating that, and I'm trying to make a point of saying that it's input, output, and throughput for low voltage and medium voltage, is because for high voltage, that is not the case. High voltage can transfer power over the course of 32 blocks, so it is much further, it's twice as far, but these high voltage wire connectors only work as input and output. They do not work as throughput, which might seem a little bit weird, but typically you're not going to need to worry about that considering it can go a significantly longer distance. But on the off chance that you do need to worry about that, you are going to be using what we have right here, which is this high voltage wire relay. Now the relay does not work as an input or an output, but it does work as a throughput. So you can pretty much use it as an intermediary to transport this a longer distance. So right here, this is one wire, this is another. So this could technically go a total of 64 blocks, unlike this, which can only go a total of 32. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're placing this high voltage wire relay down is that it can only go upside down. So right here it is hanging from a wooden post, which is typically the way I like to place it, but you cannot place it on the ground. You cannot place it unless it is upside down. It can't be hanging off a wall facing directly out. It cannot be straight up from the ground. It has to be hanging down, whether it's from a ceiling, from a post, from a block, hanging in the middle of the sky. It could be any of those, but it has to be upside down. So that's pretty much all you need to know about wiring. It's not super complicated. One thing to keep in mind is that the wire cutters are very nice to have, because when I was playing through my series, I never made these because I was too lazy, and every time I needed to make a change when it came to wiring, I went through and I actually broke these blocks, the connectors. But if you have wire cutters, you don't need to do that. You can just take them, right click on it, it'll make a quick snip, and you will get the low voltage wire coil for this one, and then you can easily take that and you can reconnect it. Now, one thing I want to point out that is really, really nice to have when you're using these wire coils is that if you were to take a snip right here and you've got nothing, you can click on this and you can scroll off it, you can go do other stuff, and then you can scroll back and it is still going to be connecting it. That's the same for any of these, so it makes it very easy to build stuff, start connecting a wire, go build some more stuff, and then finish connecting the wire. It's really nice to have, and then you can easily come over and just reconnect it like that. So that's pretty much all you need to know about wiring. Now we get to go over and learn about converting from the medium voltage to low voltage to high voltage, all that good stuff, using transformers. So this right here is a regular transformer. This is going to convert from low voltage, which you can see we have right here, which will go up, and then you'll get out medium voltage, or it could convert from medium voltage and then come out to low voltage. So that's all that this can do. It can't involve any high voltage wiring in this. It's a little bit cheaper than the other transformers we're going to look at, but it's pretty much just converting between the two lower tiers of power. Now, one thing that's nice about this is you can also place it on a wooden post, and you can see it starts to look pretty fancy. It looks a lot smaller than it does down here, but you can see we have the medium voltage wire connector sitting on top of the post, connecting to the transformer, which is connecting down to another low voltage wire connector on the ground. So that's very nice. You can make it relatively compact. Now we're going to take a look at the high voltage transformer, which is right here. Now this one is a little bit more expensive than the regular transformer, but it also allows you to include high voltage wire in the conversion. So right here you can see we are converting from medium voltage to high voltage. It also has the ability to convert from high voltage to low voltage, and keep in mind these can always go back and forth. They can go left to right, right to left. They can convert between the two no matter what. It's not just one direction. So we can also use this one to do the exact same thing that the regular transformer does. It can also convert from low voltage to medium voltage. Now, there's really no reason that you would want to use this for the low voltage to medium voltage, other than that you have a spare one laying around, just because if you were looking to make a transformer for low to medium voltage or medium voltage to low voltage, you would just make the regular one. It'd be cheaper. But of course, if you do have a spare one of these laying around, or you just feel like using one, then you can do this and it will work perfectly fine for doing the same conversion that a regular one would do. Now keep in mind the high voltage has to be placed on the ground. It cannot be placed like the regular transformer on a wooden post or something. So that is one downside, but obviously, you're converting more. It'd be, it's more expensive. It's got more going on. So it makes sense that you can't just throw it up like the other one. Now, we're also going to be going over a couple of the different switches that are involved that can cut off power based on manual or redstone input. So right here we have the redstone breaker, and what you can do with this is you can connect two of the same connectors. So in this case I'm using low voltage to low voltage. If you try and do low to medium or low to high or something, you would get an error message in chat that you couldn't connect it. But here we've got low to low, and essentially what you can do with this is put a redstone input in, and it will allow power to go through. So essentially it's just a redstone activated breaker switch, and that is very similar to the regular breaker switch that we have right here. Now typically this will be placed on a wall. It looks very weird on the ground, but essentially the idea again is that you have two of the same connectors on each side connecting, and in this case it's low voltage. And what you would do is you would manually flip it, and then this would allow power transfer to come through, and then you could flip it again and it would allow power transfer to go off. Now you can also change this using the hammer so that it will reverse it, so that if it was like this, power will be going through, and like this, power would not be going through. But I would advise you not to do that, considering it makes a little bit more sense if power is going through like this and not when it's like this. It's just a little bit easier to see when you're looking at it. Now, last thing we're going to go over is going to be power storage. Now, there are 3 different types of power storage offered when it comes to immersive engineering, and that is going to be the low voltage capacitor, the medium voltage capacitor, and the high voltage capacitor. So this right here, we can see we'll be able to store 100,000 RF. So this is why the voltometer is a little bit more useful than people might think, is because unless you have Wayla installed, in which case you will be able to see how much RF exactly is in each one, you're going to need to use a voltometer to actually be able to tell how much is stored in it. And then you can see as you go over each of these, you will see this one has 1 million RF possibly stored in it for the medium voltage one, and this one has 4 million RF stored in it. So the main thing that you need to know about these, other than how much they can store, is that the blue is going to be the input, the orange is going to be the output, and then certain sides will have nothing on them. And I'm going to quickly switch back to daytime here real quick so you guys can still see, but you can use the engineer's hammer to click on different sides and change it. So you can see there we're going to have another input, there we're going to have another output, and now we have nothing. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that you do not need to have the same inputs on each of these. So you could have low voltage inputting, medium voltage coming out. You can flip them up as much as you want. You don't need to have the same ones going in as coming out, but I would advise that you don't really want to use an excess amount when you're pulling out of these, just because there's really no need. So, if you're inputting in a low voltage, oh, of course we have rain, of course. If you're inputting into low voltage with, low voltage, and then you're immediately pulling out and using it as a buffer or some sort, then there's no need to throw medium voltage on the end of that, because you're not going to be inputting enough to pull out medium voltage. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, that's only, important in certain cases. But the last thing that I want to go over that I did miss when I was going through all of this is the current transformer. Now, this thing is a little bit confusing because it is a transformer. So you would think, oh, it might be like the regular transformer, it might be like the high voltage transformer. Well, that's not actually the case. The purpose of this is to act like a standalone voltmeter, voltometer, whatever you'd like to call it, and essentially will allow you to hook up power to each side, and in this case it can only take the same connectors from each side. So I'm using low voltage for this one, but if you were to right click on it, you can see you get a message in chat that gives you the average energy transferred in the last 20 ticks. So this is pretty nice if you have, an area for power generation, and then you have just one wire that's probably going to be high voltage coming out of that. You run the high voltage through this, or medium voltage, or whatever you have, and then you're able to see how much you're generating. And now typically this wouldn't be super important if you're looking at stuff like, water wheels or something like that, that's always going to have a static amount of generation. But if you're looking at, windmills, or if you're looking at like a diesel generator or something along those lines that might fluctuate a little bit when it's generating power, then this might be more useful for you. So that's going to be it for the actual power transportation and all that. Next thing we're going to go over is going to be power generation. Okay guys, so now we're going to talk about early game power generation. So there's 3 different types that you'll probably be using, one of which is my favorite, which of course is the water wheel. We're going to start out with that, but I will be sure to give an unbiased opinion so that you guys can make your own decisions on what you think is best. So unfortunately, we do have a little bit of a lighting glitch over here with the first water wheel, but that is perfectly fine. So for the water wheel, you're going to be using the kinetic dynamo to generate power, of course, because the water wheel is going to be turning and passively generating power for you. So the way you're going to set it up is by putting a kinetic dynamo so that the water wheel has 2 blocks below it that are open and 2 blocks above it that are open. If you don't, you won't be able to place it down. Essentially, you just need a radius around it like this of 2 blocks to be able to place it down. Like I said, if you don't have that, you won't be able to place it down, and it won't even give you an error message. It just won't let you click it down until you have that space. And then of course, you're going to have to clear out a little bit of room around it so that you can get water spinning on it. So the most effective way to set it up that's going to allow it to generate passively 30 RF per tick, which is the most that you can get, is going to be that you have a source block 1 back from the center of it at the top, and you let it run down all the way around it, and then make sure that it goes under it too. So you're going to want that and that'll make it generate the most power possible. So it's not the prettiest thing in the world the way I have it set up, but it should give you guys a rough idea of how you want the water to go around it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you can actually put 3 water wheels on each kinetic dynamo. It is limited at 3, but that means that each kinetic dynamo can essentially have 90 RF per tick coming in passively, and it's relatively easy to get water going on all 3 of them once you have water going on 1. So this is why I prefer this power generation. It's relatively easy to get early game. It's only going to require treated wood, and it actually looks pretty cool. So I like that one, but next thing we have is going to be the windmill. Now there's 2 types of windmills. There's the regular windmill, which is the one you see in front, and then there's the improved windmill. And you can probably already tell why the improved windmill is better. You can see it's spinning faster. It's got more blades on it, and it also has a little bit of wool on it, which allows it to catch more of the air, which of course would allow it to spin faster. So it does make sense that it's better, but that's not important. What's really important is that it's hooked up again to the kinetic dynamo. You need to have a radius of 6 on these, so it does need to be relatively high, and it also is relatively hard to kind of make like a wind farm. Unlike making the water wheels, which are relatively small and you can put them together easily, these do require a lot of space. So you need to put it up 6 and then of course have 6 blocks all the way around the side. One thing to keep in mind is that by increasing the Y level, you do increase the production of RF per tick. I don't have the exact numbers because it's not as simple as you'd think. It is just kind of like random Y values will make it go up by 1 RF per tick. But one thing to keep in mind is that rain does increase the production by a little bit. It's a couple RF per tick based on the Y level. And then along with that, the improved windmill has exactly double the RF per tick value of the regular windmill. So if you can make an improved windmill, you probably should, because it's a lot better than the regular windmill. The regular windmill is a little bit lackluster. And along with that, you can also click on a dye in the very center of the improved windmill, and it will allow you to dye the different colors of the different blades, so you can make it look pretty darn fancy. Lastly, a very simple way of setting up power generation passively is going to be the Thermoelectric Generator. Now this one is a little dangerous because you are going to be using lava, but as long as you are a little bit cautious around it, you should be okay. So there are many different ways to set this thing up, and the idea behind it is that you want a heat gradient. So of course you want something very hot and something very cold, and by having that gradient, it will generate power. So the only things that are available in regular Minecraft outside of Immersive Engineering that you can use would be lava, packed ice, and water. Now lava and water, being on opposing sides, will generate 15 RF per tick. Now, of course, because you can have 2 sets of that, this will max out at 30 RF per tick. Now, if you're using lava and packed ice, which is like this side, you will get 16 RF per tick. So it's a little bit better. It's nothing great. Now, if you are combining Immersive Engineering with other mods, such as, I believe, big reactors, there's a bunch of different things, like you can use yellorium, all that different stuff. To actually make a better gradient. You can get more power generation. You can get like up to 30 RF per tick just for one of these gradients. So you can get it to be pretty insane. But of course, you guys will have to look that up because I'm not going to cover all of that. I'm just covering this using Immersive Engineering stuff only, which of course would just be lava, water, and packed ice, like I said. So now I'm going to cover how you get power out of these. It's really simple. So you'd use pretty much the same thing for both of them. I'm assuming that you're going to hook it up to a capacitor or something of the sort. Obviously, this would work if you wanted to hook it up to any machine too that's going to use power, but you're just going to connect a low voltage wire connector to the top of it and then wire it over to something else. It seems really simple, but that's really all it is. It's the same for the Thermoelectric Generator. You just connect a wire connector to the top and wire it to something else, and you just want to make sure that, of course, you're sending it to the blue dot, which is the input for these, so that it's actually getting into the system. That's all you have to do. And that's all you need to know about beginning power generation. Okay guys, so now we're going to go over a couple of the simple machines and blocks that are offered by Immersive Engineering that are extremely useful while you're playing through the game with the mod. So first off, I want to talk about conveyor belts, which are awesome. They're probably the easiest way to transport items, pretty much the only way to transport items over a long distance using this mod. Now these are great because they can transport up levels, down levels, which you can see right here. They can go up, down, you can orient them in any way, and pretty much when you're working with these, you place them down, and then the hammer, the engineer's hammer, is going to be your best friend, because you can shift click and make it go up, shift click and make it go down, shift click to reset it, and then you can just right click on it and it will rotate it any direction. So the great thing about these is that each one of them has its own internal storage. So let's say you throw something on it, like let's throw the engineer's manual on it. It carries it all the way over, and this last one will automatically input into a chest. It'll automatically input into any available inventory that it's pushing into. But let's say you can't input it into the chest because the chest is full. Well, this book will sit right here on this conveyor belt and it will never despawn. You don't have to worry about it ever despawning because this has its own internal inventory. So it'll sit there until there's space for it, which is great. Along with this, there's also hoppers that act like droppers, which will essentially just let an item fall straight through and go to the inventory below it. So these are great for moving things long distances, and they're also pretty awesome just because they look cool. So these are pretty much my favorite block. Anyone that's watched my Surviving With series will know that. I always say that I love these so much, and they're extremely useful. So next thing that you're going to be using will be the external heater. Now this is great for early on in the game when you're trying to smelt a bunch of stuff down, you don't have a ton of coal. So you're generating power, and what you're going to do is you're going to be powering this external heater. Now initially you might be confused because you might be wondering why you can't power it. Because when you place it down, it's going to look like this. And you might be, oh, where do I power it? There's no place for power. It doesn't look like there's any side that's different for where I put power. And if you were to throw this on like this, it wouldn't actually power it. It wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't turn on. So to actually be able to power it, you have to take the engineer's hammer and right click on a side. Now you can do this with any of the sides. I would probably do it with like the back of it or maybe the top. But then you have this side and then you can throw down and power will be input through there. And then whenever any adjacent side has a furnace on it that needs to cook something, this will light up, it'll heat up, and these will start running. So this is great early on if you don't want to use a ton of coal or you don't have a ton of coal. Eventually it will be outdone by other blocks, but this is a great thing to use super early on because you can attach a ton of furnaces to it. Next thing is going to be the item router. Now this is pretty much the only thing that Immersive Engineering offers to sort stuff with, and it isn't the best thing to sort things with, but you can see that each side is color coded differently. And essentially what you do is you click on it and you're going to have this UI where you've got all these different color coded sides in here, and essentially these match up with the color coded sides outside. And what you can do is set 8 different outputs for each side. You can use OR dictionary filters, you can change NBT data, and you can use the fuzzy filter if you're doing stuff like using stuff with durability from a mob spawner or something, or you just want to get rid of used up tools or stuff like that. So you can change those around for this, and it's bottom, top, north, south, southwest, and east. So you can keep that in mind when you're doing any of these sides. You can input any of them, you can output from any of them. It's pretty useful, and keep in mind you can put a ton of these one after another if you need a bunch of different filters. So you can just have it so every side except this green side would have a filter on it, and so everything that's not filtered goes through the green side and then gets filtered by the next one and the next one and the next one. So if you're feeling like you don't have enough filters coming from this because you can only do 8 items per side, and of course you'd have one side that's an input and then you'd only have 5 sides that are outputs, you can just do that and use multiple of them. They're relatively cheap and pretty small, so it's pretty nice. Next thing is the charging station. Now this is great when you're using different things. One example would be the Railgun, where you need to charge it before you use it. And essentially what you do is you plug it in from the back. You can see that you have this nice little thing right here. This is typically a good indication of where you're going to plug these things in when you see this right here, this little orange kind of square on something like that. And you pretty much are just going to put your thing in here. It'll make a particle effect on the front, and then you can pull it out when it's charged. Next thing is going to be transporting and storing fluids and all that stuff. So the fluid pump is great when you're actually trying to manually pull stuff out and insert it into something else, whether you're using tanks that aren't in Immersive Engineering, or if you're using just the different liquid storage systems that Immersive Engineering does offer. The only downside is that this does take power. So if we look at the top again, you can see that it does have this right here again, like all the other things. That is where the power is going to go. Now you might initially again be confused by this whole system when you place it down, because if we break this, and we'll break these too, when you place this thing down, it doesn't have anything specific on any of these sides. So you pull out your engineer's hammer, you right click, and this is the input. It's got the blue dot. And then you can turn any other side to the output with the orange dot, and then you can convert it back. So you would have the input going in here, and then you pull the output out over here, And what you can do is you can send it to metal barrels or wooden barrels. Now these can both store up to 10 buckets worth of liquid. The only difference between the metal barrel and the wooden barrel is that the wooden barrel can only store cool liquids such as water, whereas the metal barrel will be able to store gases and hot liquids like lava. But they can store the same amount, and they're super great. You can break them and place them back down. The only annoying thing is if you're storing different amounts in each one, they're obviously going to have different data, so they won't stack. So that is one downside to it, but typically you'll probably have a bunch of full ones of possibly creosote or water, and you'll be moving those, and as long as they're all filled to the same amount, probably completely full, they will be able to stack no problem. And these are just fluid pipes which allow you to transport fluids over a distance. Okay, so another thing that's super useful is going to be tanks and silos. So this one right here is a tank, which is for fluids, and the one over there is a silo, which is for items. Now, the reason that these are so great is because they offer mass storage that for the silo is going to be, or for the tank is going to be 512 buckets, which is significantly more than you're ever going to be able to get with a ton of these barrels. It would take so many of these to compare to one silo. And along with that, or one tank, I keep calling them the different things, but the silo is going to be able to store the equivalent of roughly 24 chests. So it can hold a ton. I don't even want to say the actual number. I just know it's the same as 24 chests. So that's a lot of items. Now, when it comes to the tank, you're going to make it like this. You're going to be doing 4 treated wood fences on the bottom with a sheet metal block in the center of all of them, and then 3 layers of hollow sheet metal, 3x3, and then the top layer is a filled in 3x3 of sheet metal. And then to make it, you're just going to take your handy engineer's hammer, and you're going to right click, and you will see that that multi-block structure forms this. And of course, if you ever want to get your stuff back from a multi-block structure, you can easily just break one block, and then if you wanted to reform it, you can place it down again and reform it. So it's as simple as that. Now, when you're inputting into this one, you can input through both the top or the bottom when it comes to this. Now, when you're doing the silo, it's built a little bit differently. It's the same shape, except it is 2 more layers of hollow sheet metal blocks in a 3x3. Then what you're going to do is the same thing. You're going to click on this block right here, and you're going to be forming the silo. Now, like I said, this can hold up to 24 chests of items, except these can only be pumped in the top, and by applying a redstone signal at the bottom, it will eject items. So if you ever want to get them out, keep that in mind, but they have to go in the top, unlike in the tank. Now, last thing that I want to go over for this is the engineer's workbench. Now, this really becomes useful later in the game because it does take a little bit of work to actually get this going. You can make it relatively early, it looks pretty cool, but it really doesn't serve any purpose other than for crafting a couple of different things. So there's these things called blueprints, and you can find these throughout the world. Typically, you'd find them in a village when you come across the Immersive Engineering villager, and he would have, one of these in a chest, and you can get them, and they can do projectiles for the revolver. They can make these graphite electrodes that you're going to be using in the arc furnace, and then they can make fancier projectiles and stuff. But essentially, you're going to take the blueprints, you're going to put them in here, and you can see that without, anything in here, there's no UI other than this one spot to put it in, but the minute you put it in here, you're able to see that this kind of grayed out graphite electrode comes up. So when you put the recipe in here, you're able to pull the electrode out, and it even tells you the recipe right over here if you hover over it. This one requires 4 hop graphite ingots. Now, one other thing that this can be used for is making modifications to weaponry, which I will cover a little bit in the future, but essentially you could put the revolver in here and put upgrades on it, you could put the chemical thrower in here, you could put the railgun, all that stuff can go in here, have the upgrades put on it, and then you just easily pull it out. Now, the one cool thing that you might be able to notice is that when you don't have the blueprint in here, there's nothing on it. When you throw the blueprint in, it gets a 3-dimensional blueprint on it, so it can be a pretty cool decoration too to spruce up your house a little bit. So that's it for all these simple machines. Next, I'm going to go over a little bit of the more complicated machines and some of the cool weaponry that you can play around with. Okay guys, so now we're going to be jumping into what I would consider to be the bread and butter of the Immersive Engineering mod. It's going to be where you spend most of your resources, most of your time, and it's probably going to be the most interesting and entertaining part of the mod for you, and the most useful, and that's going to be the multi-block heavy machinery structures. So these can be a little bit complicated, and I'm going to do my best to cover as much as I can on these, but one thing I want to say before we jump into it, as with everything else that I've covered today, is the book right here is going to be your best friend with these, because I'm not going to be able to cover everything, and you might not be able to see all the different layers for these. So if you do go into the book, and let's say you click on heavy machinery and go to the crusher, in here you can see that right away it gives you a 3D idea of what you want to construct this with. It gives you the required materials, and you can see layer by layer how to make it. You can go block by block, and then eventually you will have the whole structure, and you can actually see what it'll look like when it's completed. And it gives you a bunch of different details on what it's going to be doing, how you input stuff, how you output stuff, all of that. So if I do forget to cover something in here, you should be able to find it in the book. And if I do breeze over a couple things like each layer, which I will have, but I'm not going to spend too much time on, you should be able to find that in the book, or be able to pause the video and just look at what I have on the screen. So the first multi-block structures that you're going to start out with pretty early on in the game are going to be the coke oven and the crude blast furnace. So each of these is just a 3x3x3 solid structure, so each one is going to take 27 blocks. You've got the coke oven right here, which is made of coke bricks, and you have the crude blast furnace right here, which is made of blast bricks. So each of these chests just has what you need in it, 27 of each. Pretty simple. To make these, you're just going to take your engineering hammer, and you're going to right click on the center block. Now keep in mind that this face will only come up on one side. Obviously you can, click and enter on any side, but if you are worried about, your base looking fancy, be sure to click on the side that you want this texture to come up on. It's the same thing with the blast furnace. It's not as big, but it will only be on the side that you right click on. Now, the coke oven is just going to generate coal coke for you passively. So what you're going to do is you're going to put coal in right here. It's going to have this little flame light up a little bit, and then you're going to get coal coke out here, and it's going to passively generate creosote too. Each process is going to get you creosote, and then that creosote is going to be used to make treated wood. Now you can input bottles in here. You can see the blue dot is where you put them in, and the bottles will fill with creosote, or bucket, or whatever you want to put in here will fill with creosote, and you'll be able to pull it out using this one right here. So now we have the crude blast furnace. Now each blast furnace, whichever one you're using, is going to be where you're going to finally use all that coal coke you just made. And essentially what the blast furnaces will do is turn iron into steel using coal coke as the power. So it doesn't require any actual power to do that, but it does take a while. So essentially you're going to have the iron in this top portion right here. You're going to have the coal coke down here. The flame again will slowly light up, and that's the indication of how close it is to being done. And then you're going to get the steel out right here, and you're going to get slag out as a byproduct right here. So unfortunately, you do have to make sure you take the slag out, because if the slag does fill up, it is going to stop the production completely, but that shouldn't be an issue if you're still removing the steel and constantly filling it up with more iron and more coal coke. Now you can automate these together. They are a little bit more difficult to automate now that there is the improved blast furnace, which we're going to go over in a second, but I have done it. I do have a fully automated steel production setup that did use the crude blast furnace. I did switch over to the improved one, but if you want to go back and find the video in my Surviving With series, you can do that and easily see how to automate these to get fully automated steel production. So now we're going to go over the improved blast furnace. Now this one is again a 3x3x3 structure that is solid, but this one is made of reinforced blast bricks. So it's going to take 27 reinforced blast bricks, and then it's going to take a hopper. Now the hopper is in the very center of the top, and the whole idea is that when you form it, we'll see, so you're going to, again, right click on it in the very center, and this one looks a little bit fancier than the other ones. It looks a lot fancier actually. It actually looks like a furnace, but the whole idea is that you input everything into the top. So the iron and the coal coke go into the top, and then it goes down, and of course it'll fill up. It'll do the same exact thing. The UI is identical, all of that's the same, but then it also makes it so that the output will come right out here out the front. So if you wanted to, you could take conveyor belts and you could just throw those down like this, carry it away. It'll automatically output onto a conveyor belt. You could also put chests there and stuff, but I usually use conveyor belts. And then on the back, you can do the same exact thing, and this is where the slag will get output. And remember, if you do automate it, you need to make sure that you get the slag out, or else once it reaches 64, it will stop, which is slightly unfortunate, but it's easy to work around because you can automatically output that too. Now, you might be wondering what these things on the side are for, because they're not outputs. Well, those are for the blast furnace preheaters. Now, these were added right when the improved blast furnace was added, and these are great because if you have extra power laying around, they can actually speed up the process. So what you do is you go and you place these down. Now, one thing to keep in mind is they don't automatically attach. So if I were to place one like this, it wouldn't automatically attach. So it's a little bit easier to just place it facing like this because you know it's not going to automatically attach. You can reorient them, but I just try and place them the correct way the first time. And essentially, all you have to do is hook power up to the top of these, and they will be able to increase the speed at which the blast furnace heats technically, but it's pretty much just increasing the speed at which steel is produced at the cost of a little bit of power. So you could attach one to each side, maximum of 2, and it will speed up the whole process to a pretty absurd rate. It is a lot faster than using just like the crude blast furnace, so it is very nice to have, but of course you don't need those. If you don't have the extra power laying around, you can use this without them, and it will take no power at all to actually work. So that is the whole setup with blast furnaces and coke ovens. Now we get to move into the actual machinery, and this is probably the most fun part, I would say. This is where the real multi-blocks come in, and now it starts getting expensive and using a bunch of the steel that you will have just made using the blast furnaces. So it isn't a bad idea to make a lot of steel if you're just sitting around wondering what to do, because now we're going to be making the crusher. So the crusher is probably one of the earlier multi-block structures that you're going to make, and the reason behind this is because it is for ore doubling. And that's really important early on because you want to get the most bang for your buck, essentially. So to make this whole thing, it's going to take 10 steel scaffolding, 11 light engineering blocks, 8 steel fences, and 9 hoppers. So it's not super bad. You're not getting into any heavy engineering blocks yet, but it is still a little bit expensive. So this is going to be the setup for the first layer. Now when I do these, like I said before, you can feel free to pause and look at them, but they will also be in the book. So I already showed you an example of the crusher where you can easily go down to the first layer right here, and you can see the same exact thing that I'm showing on the screen. But if you want to pause the video and look, you can just do that. So this is the first layer. This is going to be the second layer right here. This is where you start using the steel fences. And then this is going to be the last layer. It's just going to be a 3x3 of hoppers. And once you have this completed, you can take out your hammer and you can start forming it. So you're just going to take it, right click on the center, and there you go. Okay, so now we get to start talking about the inputs, the outputs, the power, and the redstone signal that you can add to this. So right here is going to be the output. So this is where you're going to get all the stuff that's crushed, whether you're crushing ores, whether you're crushing stone, whether you're crushing gravel, whatever, this is where the output's going to be. Now keep in mind, if you throw something in the machine that doesn't have an actual crushed output, it's just going to delete it. So if you were to take and throw this engineer's manual in there, nothing would come out, it would just get ruined. So if you do want to trash some stuff, you can feel free to throw it in there, but if you accidentally throw some stuff in there, do not be expecting to get it back because it is gone for good. So try to not screw that up with anything too valuable, but this is where it's going to be output. It'll automatically eject if you were to put a conveyor belt like right there. It'll automatically eject onto the conveyor belt, which is great. And you can put a redstone signal right here to turn it on or off. So if you do have power going into it, but you don't want it to be running, you can put a lever right here, flip it, it'll turn it off, and it won't keep running even if stuff goes into it. And then you can put power right here into it. So you just wire it up right there. And then everything else you're just going to drop right into here. So you would just throw it right in there. Now if it was running, these would start spinning and it would spit nothing out because the conveyor belts will not get anything when they're in the crusher. So that's pretty much the entire crusher setup. Relatively easy to make, relatively simple, and extremely useful. So now we're going to come over here to the metal press, which really isn't as big as the crusher or other things that you might be making that are multi-block structures. This is relatively new, and it's going to be used just to make a couple of different things, such as metal plates or rods, stuff like that. So essentially, it's just going to take 2 conveyor belts, 3 steel scaffolding, a piston, and a heavy engineering block. Now, I believe you do need this to make the improved blast furnace, which is why it's relatively important, but it's also relatively cheap, not super bad to make, and it's relatively compact. So all you're going to do is get it like this, then you're going to click on it in the center block again, and you're going to have the metal press. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that right here, this thing is what's pushing down on it. So there's 2 different molds. You have the plate mold right here, and you have the rod mold. And what you can do is when it first starts out, there'll be nothing in there. All you have to do is right click with one and it'll attach it. And then anything that goes through here is going to get pressed. And then once you have one in there, you can easily exchange them by just right clicking and it'll swap them out. And the other one you can just throw back into a chest somewhere. Now this will automatically output if you have it to a conveyor belt, to a chest, and it'll be able to accept inputs from conveyor belts too. And if you're powering it, you just have to send a wire right up here to the top. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is going to be the assembler. Now the assembler is pretty nice. It's for automated crafting and it can be extremely useful in certain scenarios. It's also relatively cheap too. So it's going to take 9 steel scaffolding, 4 light engineering blocks, 6 sheet metal blocks, 6 structural arms, and 2 conveyor belts. So this is the first layer right here. It's just a 3x3 of steel scaffolding. This is the next layer, which might be a little bit difficult to see. It's going to be the 2 conveyor belts going in the same direction with a light engineering block in between the two, and then 2 3x1s of sheet metal going alongside those. This is the last layer. It's going to be a 3x1 of structural arms, a 3x1 of light engineering blocks, and then a 3x1 of structural arms again. Now once this is complete, you're going to go over to a side like this, and you're going to make sure that you click right in the center on where the conveyor belt is, and it's going to form this, which is the assembler. Now one thing to keep in mind is that you want to pay attention to the blue dot, which is the input, and it's also relatively easy to tell because of how the conveyor belt's going. And the other side will have an orange, which is an output. Again, you can input automatically to these using conveyor belts going in one side and out the other. Now when you click on this, the UI is pretty simple. So you've got these 3 crafting grids because each assembler has the ability to have 3 auto-crafted recipes in it. So you set the crafting grids right here, and I will just grab out some wood and we can use this as an example. So we're going to set it that we want to make a chest. So we'd make the pattern right there. And then if wood were to get input, it would go right in here. So this is the internal storage that will auto craft stuff. And this is where everything that is being crafted will go. And then it'll be automatically output. And this is also where the input will come in. Now keep in mind, these right here are for any fluids that might need to come in here if you're using fluids in crafting. And this is where the internal power buffer will go. Now when you're powering this, it goes right in the top right here. And of course we already went over the inputs and the outputs. So that's the assembler. It is relatively useful and it's extremely nice that it has more than one recipe that you can auto craft with it. So it makes it extremely versatile when you're using it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go over is the bottling machine. Now this one's pretty cool, especially when you start getting into the chemical throwers and stuff like that, because it helps you refill pretty much anything that has a fluid stored in it. So you can do bottles, you can do chemical throwers, jerry cans, anything like that. It's relatively cheap too. It's got 5 steel scaffolding, 2 light engineering blocks, and 5 conveyor belts. So it's going to be made just like this. So you've got on the very bottom, it's just going to be the 5 steel scaffolding, which is going to be covered by conveyor belts. Now pay attention to how the conveyor belts are running. This is very important that they run just like this. So 1 going this way, 2 going that way, and then 2 going back. If it's not like this, it actually won't form. And keep in mind, the light engineering blocks are just 1 and 2 at the very back. So that's how you make it. And once you've got it formed like this, you can easily just right click on it, and that will make the bottling machine. So you're going to have power come in right here at the top. And of course you can see that the input is over here. It's relatively easy to see considering you can see the way the conveyor is running. And this is where the output's going to be. You can have it both input and output again from conveyor belts. It's actually a lot easier to do that because so let's just say you have the conveyor belts like this, and we'll turn that so it's going in. If we were to take a bottle and let's just throw one on a conveyor belt right here. Oh. Okay, so it got on there, and you can see because there's no power running to the machine, it's holding it right here. The minute power is running to it, it'll start cycling it around, and it'll fully send it through whether or not there's a fluid in there. So all it needs to actually start going is power. It doesn't actually need a fluid, but of course it won't fill up the bottle until there is a fluid in there. So to get a fluid in there, you're going to be inputting it right into this hole in the back. So typically an easy way to do this will be to use a fluid pipe. It can easily attach on there, and I'm using it from a metal barrel which had water in it, and it fully fills this machine up using the water because we are attaching it to the output of the metal barrel, which is of course the orange dot. Always keep that in mind when you're transporting fluids, is to look that you're actually pulling it out of the output and putting it into the correct input for the machine. So that's the bottling machine. Doesn't have as many uses as other multi-block structures might, but it is still pretty darn cool. So now we're going to jump into making the diesel generator, getting all the diesel stuff set up to do this, because this requires a lot of different structures to make the biodiesel to actually put into the diesel generator and start working on it. So first things first, we're going to make the fermenter and the squeezer. Now that's what we have right here. This one has the fermenter on it. This one is the squeezer. They're identical when you actually make them. They require each 19 light engineering blocks, and then this one requires 8 fermenter blocks, and this one requires 8 industrial squeezer blocks. Now it's just a 3x3x3. And if we look at the inside here, you can see that there's one light engineering block in the very center, which is surrounded by 8 of these fermenter blocks. And the rest of it is just going to be light engineering blocks on the top and bottom. So it's just like that. Same thing with the squeezer. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the engineer's hammer, click again, and this is the same thing when it comes to textures as we had with the coke oven and the blast furnace. The textures are only going to be on the front, these fancy textures with a little of the gauges on it and the vents right there, but you are going to be able to output from the fermenter and the squeezer on each side. So like this. Now the fermenter is going to be able to take potatoes, apples, sugarcane, and melon to turn into ethanol, and that's what's going to be output from this side. And then you're going to be able to use melon seeds, pumpkin seeds, regular seeds, and industrial hemp seeds. So essentially every seed that's available in the pack to get plant oil or seed oil from the industrial squeezer. Now, we're actually going to need to combine these in what I believe is called the refinery. I'm not actually positive on this one, but essentially you combine these to make the biodiesel. So this right here is going to take 8 steel scaffolding, 6 light engineering blocks, 24 sheet metal blocks, and 3 heavy engineering blocks. So right here is going to be the first layer. And this one's just going to be a 5x3, much like the crusher was, and much like a couple of the other machines will be. This is going to be the second layer, and you start making what would make the tanks up. So you have the 3x2 of sheet metal blocks, and then the heavy engineering block is going to be on the front, and the light engineering block is going to be on the side that's going to be the back. This is the last layer. It's just going to be extending the 3x2s of sheet metal blocks up one. And once you finally have that, you can take the engineer's hammer and you can click on it like this. And essentially with this, what you're going to be able to do is put the redstone signal right here if you want to make sure it's turned off or turned on. The input is going to be on this side and on this side. You can input them in each side, whichever one you want. And then you are going to be able to put power in the back, and the output is going to come right out here in the front. So if you click on the UI, you're going to see it's got an internal storage right here, and right here. And these are going to be the biodiesel, and then it's going to be the ethanol or the plant or seed oil. And then if you want to manually input it, you can. You don't have to automatically input it in the side. You can insert bottles into each one of these and use them to pull out too. And then here you have the internal energy storage. One thing I forgot to actually mention real quick that I was just thinking about is the input on power on both the fermenter and the squeezer is going to be right on the top right here. So that's pretty simple. I just forgot to mention that. But you're going to combine them right here, and then you're finally going to have all the fuel that you're going to need to actually put into the diesel generator. So the diesel generator itself is going to take 6 generator blocks, 9 radiator blocks, and 27 heavy engineering blocks. So this one starts getting a little bit more expensive when it comes to using steel. This right here is the first layer. It's just going to be a 3x3 of heavy engineering blocks surrounded on one side by the radiator blocks and on the other side by the generator blocks. This is going to be the second layer right here. Again, it's literally the exact same thing. It's a duplicate of the last layer. And right here is going to be the last layer. It's almost a duplicate, but it does not have the generator blocks. It's got the heavy engineering blocks and the radiator blocks though. So then what you're going to do is take the engineer's hammer and you can click, and there you go. So now that this is the diesel generator, it is extremely loud when it's running, so keep that in mind. There are a couple ways to muffle it that are being added. I don't know if they've been added in yet, but I did see on Blue Sunrise's Twitter that he was having a couple different ways to actually muffle it, such as headphones and stuff like that you can put on. Now in the series when I did this, I had to deal with this system being extremely loud, but hopefully you guys don't have to worry about that for too long. So this system, you're going to have the redstone signal right here. So if you want to turn it on or off, you're going to be able to input on this side or on this side with the biodiesel. The power, there's 3 different outputs for it. You can pull it out of as many of these as you want. The max you can pull out and the max that the system will produce is going to be 4096 per tick, but you can pull it out if you wanted, 3 medium voltage or low voltage or 1 high voltage. It's fine. It doesn't matter. You can pull those out here. And there actually is no UI. You just have to fill it up, let it run, and then pull the power out. Now, this is the best form of power generation that you can get in the game when it comes to immersive engineering, which is probably why it's so difficult to actually make. The process is relatively long, but it is very rewarding if you get it fully automated. So if you guys do want to see a fully automated setup with a farm and everything that it automates the fermenter and the squeezer and this whole setup, then you can feel free to go to my Surviving With series where I cover the whole thing. And it takes me a couple episodes to set it up, but it does get completed in the end. So now we're going to cover the arc furnace, which is probably the biggest multi-block structure. It probably rivals the excavator for being the biggest multi-block structure available in the pack. Really, really big, really expensive when it comes to steel, but it's also pretty rewarding. I never used it that much, but it can kind of replace now the improved blast furnace if you don't have that automated. So overall, it takes 27 reinforced blast bricks, 1 cauldron, 14 steel slabs, 4 blocks of steel, 14 light engineering blocks, 7 heavy engineering blocks, and 10 steel scaffolding. So right here, this is the first layer. This is the second layer when you start actually using the reinforced blast bricks. This is going to be the third layer right here. And this is the fourth layer, and it goes all the way up to a fifth layer. Actually, it's a 5x5x5 setup. So here you go. Here's the fifth layer. Now when you're done with this, you just take the engineer's hammer and you are going to right click on the cauldron, and boom, you have the arc furnace, which is a very, very big setup. Now this machine is pretty easy to actually automate, but there is one unfortunate thing that I will cover with the automation in a second. But if you're going to click on this, you can see that the UI has a lot of stuff going on in here. So essentially right over here, this 3x4 is going to be all the different main inputs. And essentially if you've ever used the Tinker's Smeltery, you'll know the same thing is like this. It's got these little bars that are right next to these blocks, and essentially what it's going to do is as the ore is being cooked down, these will increase, and it kind of shows how close it is to actually being fully cooked down into what you're making. So you can have multiple in there at the same time cooking down, and over here is where you have the byproducts. It's actually not the byproducts, it's you combine two things essentially. So if we take a look at a recipe, you've got copper and nickel grit. So the grit would go over here, whereas the copper, the main ingredient, would go over here. And then you have the products which come out down here. Now this one does produce slag too, which can be output out the back. So essentially the slag will come out right here, and you will be able to output the main product right out the front. Let's say you were making steel or something along those lines. That would come out right here. Oh, whoops. Let's get that back down. The redstone input can be put right here if you want to make sure it's turned off or on. And in the back, the power can be hooked up to any 3 of these right here. And up at the top, you're going to be able to input on the left side. You're going to be able to input the main ingredient. On the right side, you're going to be able to put in the, I guess you call it side ingredient, automatically if you drop them in there. And the last thing that you're going to need for this system is going to be the graphite electrodes. So I did kind of briefly do an overview of those when I went over the engineer's workbench, but essentially to make them, you need to find the blueprint, which you should be able to find in a villager's house. It's going to be obviously the engineering villager's house, and then you put that in an engineer's workbench. You make 3 of them, and those are going to go right here in the top. So I've got some of them right here to give you an idea of how they look. So each one, as you put it in, it will fill up one of these slots right here. And each time there's a process of cooking something down, these go down a little bit. They can be used 477 times before they run out of integrity, and then you need to replace them or the system won't work. Now, unfortunately, you used to be able to automatically input these into the system, but that was changed recently, so there's no way to automate this. You have to manually switch these in here. That is what I consider to be one of the biggest downsides of this whole setup, but you don't need to replace them that often. 500 uses is a very long time, so you do have to manually input them, but that shouldn't be too big of an issue. And that is going to be the arc furnace. Relatively simple, pretty useful if you don't have automated setups for other things, but if you do, it can be a little bit pricey and not always justifiable to make. So now we're going to go over the last multi-block structure, and probably the one that most people will find most useful next to what I would consider to be the crusher, which is the most useful of the multi-block structures. But this is going to be the excavator, which is going to be for automated mining. It can mine in the same area for 144 consecutive days, and it does require 4096 RF per tick. So it's essentially lining up perfectly with a constantly running or diesel generator. So it is really nice if you can get the fully running diesel generator setup, but this thing does burn through power like no tomorrow. So to make the actual whole structure, it's going to require both of these, but we're going to go over each one individually. So to make the main portion of the structure, it's going to take 12 blocks of steel, 9 light engineering blocks, 13 heavy engineering blocks, and 3 steel scaffolding. Now to make what is considered the wheel of the structure, it's going to take 9 blocks of steel and 20 steel scaffolding. Now these both get made together, but I'm going to go over them separately and then together. So to make what I would consider to be the main structure, this is going to be the first layer right here. This is going to be the second layer. And this is going to be the third layer right here. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take the engineer's hammer, you can click on the center block in the back, and now you're going to have this structure right here, which is pretty cool, but it does look like it might be missing something right in here. So I'm not going to cover the inputs and outputs just yet until we have the full structure. I'm going to cover the wheel now. So this right here is the wheel, obviously because it's just pretty much, I mean, it's 3-dimensional, but it's 2-dimensional in the sense that there's not multiple layers going in the horizontal direction. So this is essentially what the one layer looks like. This is the wheel. And to put them together, you are going to, oh, you know what? I need to break this first to show you guys. Okay, so let's put that back on there. So this is what they're going to look like before they're assembled when you put them together. You're going to want to make sure that this block right here, this block of steel, lines up with this block right here. So it's going to line up perfectly with this center block of this kind of plus symbol right here. That's where it's going to go. And you can see that it does line up perfectly right here. Once you've got those assembled, it's going to go slightly underground, so it's a little bit annoying to make, but then you're going to come back, click on the same spot, and it will form both of them together. Now it looks like it's fully completed. This is what the excavator looks like. It looks really cool, and it looks even cooler when it's running because these do get filled up. These little buckets get filled up with the ore that it's about to give you, and it spins around, dumping it off slowly and pulling up more ore. So that is really cool. You're going to have the output coming right back here. You're going to have the redstone input be able to go right here if you want to turn it on or off, and you're going to be able to power it on any of these 3 plugs right there. So pretty awesome in that sense, relatively simple to use. But one thing that you want to keep in mind when you're using that is to make the core sample drill. Now this actually is not a multi-block structure. It's just a really big single block. So if you look it up, you can see that it is a very big single block. It's not a multi-block structure. You can easily pick it up and place it down. And essentially what you're going to want to do is power it right down here at the bottom. You can plug it into any of these 4. There's one on each side. And what it's going to do is it's going to send this little shaft in the center. It's going to spin down and then it's going to spin back up. And if you click on it, you'll get a message in chat as to how completed it is percentage wise. You're going to want to make sure it has power all the way down, all the way back up. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell you what kind of deposit there is in the area that you're going in. So essentially the excavator is unlike other mods mining tools in the sense that it's not going to mine what's actually there. It's going to mine what Immersive Engineering says is there. So I could be standing right here on what would be like a copper deposit. So if I were to put the core sample drill here, it told me there was a copper deposit, then I would get pretty much all copper for 144 consecutive days from the excavator. And you can actually look in the book. Oh, you can see you did get the chat message there, but you can look in the book if you go up to, I believe, Overview and Resources and Mineral Deposits is what they're called. This refers to the core sample drill as a special machine, and you can see it talks about them. So you've got the different mineral deposits here, so you could get bauxite, you could get coal, you could get copper, galena, gold, iron, lapis, lead, magnetite, nickel, platinum, pyrite, quartzite, silver. So you get all these different ones and you'll be able to see the percentage that you're going to pull up while you're using the excavator in that area. But it's important that you make this because if you start the excavator in an area that contains nothing, you're not going to get anything from it. So you do want to make sure that you find the area you build the excavator in to actually have minerals in it that you can pull up from it. So that's going to be it for all the different multi-block structures, guys. Thanks for bearing with me. Lastly, I'm going to cover weaponry, and then that's going to be it for the entire video. Okay, guys, so lastly, we're going to be covering the weaponry that's offered with the mod. Now, a lot of this is just for fun. A lot of it's not super effective. some of them, which I would consider to be tools kind of, which is the drill, can be more effective than others, but the rest of it, like the chemical thrower and stuff, really don't do that much other than just, do stuff to entertain you, really. But essentially, you're going to be working at the engineer's workbench, and what you're going to do is you're going to make either the revolver, the mining drill, the railgun, or the chemical thrower, and then you can add a bunch of different upgrades to these. So we're going to start out with the revolver. So essentially, you can put the revolver in there, and it can have 2 upgrades, or you could have what is over here, which is called a shader, which is pretty much something that you're going to find throughout the world, like in the village with the engineer. And essentially you can use this to color it differently, but other than coloring it differently, you can also add upgrades like the extended magazine, which increases the magazine size, the bayonet, which adds melee damage to it, and the amplifier electron tubes, which shoot or make it inflict shock damage when you shoot it. So essentially what you do is just shift click these in there. You can see that it visually alters the revolver, and then if you wanted to, you could just pull it out and it would have the upgrades attached to it. Now, the revolver is a little bit different in the sense that it also has what is called the speed loader. Now, this is not an upgrade you actually add on, but you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, it does have a little bit of like what would look like a UI there. And if you right-click holding it, you can essentially take ammo, fill this up, and it makes reloading the revolver a lot faster. You can have tons of these in your inventory all loaded up, and it will make it so that you can constantly reload your revolver after you shoot the bullets out of it. With 8 fresh new bullets ready to go right on the spot. So if you are going into battle with something, or let's say you wanted to fight the Ender Dragon or a Wither with it, then you would probably want a bunch of these so that you could quickly refill it really easily and it doesn't take up an upgrade slot. So that's the revolver. I'll let you mess around with all the different ammunition that you can find using NEI, because there is a lot to go over, but most of it's going to be made in the engineer's workbench using blueprints for either common projectiles or specialized projectiles. So the next thing we're going to go over is the chemical thrower. So again, the 2 upgrades that you could have for it would be the focus nozzle, which decreases the spread and increases the range of the chemical thrower, or the large tank, which increases the internal tank size of the mining drill and chemical thrower. So you could shift click these on there. Again, it's got space for a shader. It does not change it like you would think with a revolver with visual changes, but if you were to look at this, you can see that down in the bottom right hand corner, it does have a fuel gauge for it, which will fill up if you were to fill it up. It also has the ability to be toggled with flaming, quote unquote, like you can light the gas or the chemical on fire if it is flammable, in which case that little portion on the center of the dial will change so that you can see that it will be lighting it on fire. For the mining drill, you can click it in, and then the first things you have to worry about are going to be the drill head. So you have the option of having an iron drill head, which mines an area of 2x2x1, mining level redstone with a speed of 9 and durability of 4000, which can be put on there, and you can see that it actually does make a visual change to the front. Or you could throw on a steel drill head, which is a little bit darker, looks a little bit nicer, and matches it better, which is a mining area of 3x3x1, level of obsidian, mining speed of 10, and durability of 8000. So double durability is pretty darn nice. Then you can add 3 upgrades. The options are additional augers, which increase the attack damage and stack up to 3. You can have the large tank, which increases the internal tank size of the mining drill. You have the pressurized air tank, which allows the mining drill to operate underwater. And you have the advanced lubrication system, which increases the digging speed of the mining drill. So you got that. And then lastly, you are going to have the railgun. Now the railgun, I talked about it earlier when I mentioned the charger, which you can use to charge the railgun. And for this one, you can have the precision scope, which allows the railgun to zoom in, and the additional capacitors, which reduces the charge time and increases the energy storage of the railgun. So those are the different weapons and tools that you can have that you can work with in the engineering workbench. Most of them are just for fun, but the drill can be relatively useful. I had fun with the chemical thrower using it mainly to get rid of excess, just kind of liquids that I had laying around. But it's up to you guys. If you want to use them, you can. If you don't, you can do perfectly fine without using any of them. But that is going to be it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful and were able to get, information on whatever you needed. If you guys are curious why I made this video, I know I mentioned it earlier. I typically probably wouldn't have made it, but a lot of people requested that I do it. And although I'm not the best at making, reviews of mods or stuff like that, I'm better at kind of let's play stuff. I thought that it'd be good because personally, I've played the mod for, a good solid 1 to 2 months straight, just playing with that. I've done the, I know the ins and outs of every part of the mod. So I know it pretty well. I thought it might be useful to get my opinion on it if you guys wanted to. But I want to say thank you guys for watching, and if you found this video useful or entertaining in any way, please feel free to give it a like, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask in the comments. I will answer every question. If you guys need help with anything, do not worry about how simple it may seem or how complicated it may seem. I will not mind at all helping you guys figure anything out, so post that in the comments, and as always, I will talk to you guys later.